Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the weekly audio version of the Shema Yisrael newsletter titled Watching for Messiah as we guard the month of the Abib. Well, this was originally sent out as a weekly newsletter on day 27 of month 12 on the Creator's lunisolar calendar, otherwise known as March 9th, 2024, on the Roman solar calendar. Now, over the past couple of weeks, we've looked at rebellion in contemplation of Passover, which is quickly approaching, by the way. Of course, in order to observe Passover at the correct time, you need to know how to tell time. We know that Passover occurs in the first month of the year. Yahuwah specifically instructed Moses and Aharon, this month, which is Chodesh in Hebrew, shall be your beginning of months, Hodeshim. It shall be the first month, Hodesh, of the year to you. The first month of the year was not given a name, rather, it's referred to as the month of the Abib. It was later called Abib, but Yahuwah he never described it by name. It was only the month of the Abib, and usually considered to be month 1 or the first month. He commanded, observe et month of the Abib, and keep the Passover to et Yahuwah your Elohim. For in the month of the Abib, Yahuwah your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night. The word translated as observe is shomer, which is better translated as keep, watch, or guard. Now, did you notice that Aleph Ta, the et, affixed to the month, the Chodesh? Well, the Aleph Ta represents the Messiah in this passage because he's hidden in the month of the Abib. And that's why we're supposed to guard the month of the Abib. We need to be watching for the Messiah as we guard the month of the Abib. The Hebrew word Abib doesn't exclusively refer to a specific stage of maturity for a head of barley. That's a Karaite tradition that has infected the understanding of many well-meaning people who want to follow the Torah. Sadly, this false teaching, it's a tradition that gets passed along by false teachers and literally becomes ingrained in people's minds as absolute truth, and no pun intended there. The word Abib derives from the root aleph bet bet, which means fresh, bright, new life springing forth, and green. The month of the Abib is essentially the month of spring, when everything starts to turn green and new life abounds. There's nothing in the Torah that commands us to subjectively inspect crops of barley in order to determine the beginning of a year. The mechanism for determining a year was specified on day 4 of creation. It involves the 2 great lights, the sun and the moon. It's a principle built into the fabric of creation when the lights were set in place to reckon time. Interestingly, the lights were established on a different day from those things that spring forth out of the ground from seeds. The distinction is clear. Time is reckoned in the heavens, not from what comes out of the earth. In order to guard, keep, and watch over this particular month, we need to be able to determine when the year begins. That is the only way that we can observe the first month. The Torah specifically instructs us to utilize the sun and the moon for time and appointed times. In fact, it specifically states that the 2 great lights are also for years in Genesis 1:14. So that begs the question, how do we use the sun and the moon to determine years? Well, we can scratch off every solar calendar that ignores the moon right off the bat. This was confirmed by the scholarly article titled The Calendar of Ancient Israel by W. Day Heidel. In that article, the author discusses the incursion of solar calendars, such as the one found in the text of Jubilees. He concludes by stating that the calendar of Israel thus experienced several changes, but it was essentially based on a lunisolar year. For a brief time only did it rest on a solar year when it adopted some of the forms of the Egyptian. This confirms what I've repeatedly been warning about. Solar calendars are false calendars when it comes to following Yahuwah and his appointed times. And the calendar of Israel is not a solar calendar. Well, then how did Israel determine the year using the sun and the moon? The answer is what is commonly referred to as the rule of the equinox. It's called a rule because it's a standard applied that conforms to the requirements found in the Torah. It simply provides that month 1 of a new year will begin at the sighting of the new moon closest to the turn or the tekufa of the spring equinox. Now, every ancient culture knew how to determine the turns, the tekufot, of the year, including the spring equinox. The spring equinox is the time when day and night are equal, although the days will continue to get longer. The fall or the autumnal equinox is just the opposite. It's when days are night and day are equal, but the daylight it gets shorter and shorter until it reaches the winter solstice. It's simple to establish a marker to identify the spring equinox, and many cultures would build those markers into their architecture. Anybody can determine a spring equinox if they desire to take the time to learn the essentials. And if you're interested, I provided a link to an article produced by the Torah calendar team titled Determining the Hebrew Day of the Spring Equinox. And if you go to my website, www.shemaisrael.net, you can find it there, or you can find it at the Torah calendar website. Once you know how to determine the equinox by gauging the movement of the sun, you then look to the moon to determine the first day of month 1 of the new year. And there are some commands that must be considered when determining month 1. When referring to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Yahuwah commanded, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast to Yahuwah. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in all your quarters. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, this is done because of what Yahuwah did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be as a sign to you on your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes. The Yahuwah's Torah may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand Yahuwah has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep his ordinance in its season from year to year. Well, it's important to remember that the Passover meal is different from the Feast of Unleavened Bread. While the Passover commemorates redemption and salvation from death by the blood of the Lamb, the Feast of Unleavened Bread commemorates the deliverance from slavery and subsequent freedom for those that have been saved. The feast began the day following the Passover. It was when the Israelites began their 7-day journey out of Egypt. The 7-day feast is referred to as a sign. And remember that the 2 great lights are 4 signs in Genesis 1:14. Now, most people only think of eclipses and other phenomena as the signs referred to in Genesis 1:14, but the Torah clearly connects the lights with this feast. And this is confirmed further when we're told that the feast must be kept in its season, its moed, from year to year. The feast that celebrates deliverance and freedom and new life must occur in the season of renewed life. So, it's important when determining the new year that the Feast of Unleavened Bread lands in its proper season and in a new year. One cannot help to recognize the similarity between this command concerning the feast and the Shema found in Deuteronomy 6:8. And of course, this specific ordinance, this Hugah, is connected with the Aleph Tah, the Et. Now, in the midst of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Yahuwah instructed that the first, or the reshit, of the grain harvest would be offered by the priest. Now, some people erroneously call the offering the Feast of First Fruits, and that's simply incorrect. There is no Feast of First Fruits within the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That false teaching is what you would call adding to the Torah, and it's prohibited by Yahuwah. The true day of first fruits is the Feast of Shavuot, as we read in Numbers 28:26. Now, it's not the Feast of First Fruits, it's a first fruit offering or a reshit offering. And when we consider that first grain offering within the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's important to consider the command found in Exodus 22. Do you remember the commandment that I quoted a few weeks ago when discussing rebellion? Well, here's that command followed by another that talks about the first fruit offerings. And it starts with the one that we referred to before. You shall not revile Elohim, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The first fruit of your sons you shall give to me. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. So right after the commandment linked with rebellion is a command not to delay what belongs to Elohim. In other words, don't delay the first fruits. The reshit, or the first offering of barley, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread is made by the priest. He's a ruler of the people, and it's certainly not to be delayed because it initiates the grain harvest. Then we read about that in that actual offering in Leviticus. It says, and Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a omer of the firstfruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the omer before Yahuwah to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the Shabbat, the priest shall wave it. And you shall offer on that day, when you wave the omer, a male lamb of the first year without blemish, as a burnt offering to Yahuwah. Its grain offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour, mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah, for a sweet aroma, and its drink offering shall be of wine 1/4 of a hin. You shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings, and you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the omer of the wave offering. 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. The idea was that the priest would make the offering while the people were feasting, and they would all then go home and start harvesting their grain while counting the omer, which is a dry measure of grain. I included all the aleph tahs that are attached to the omer because it's pretty significant that the aleph tah, there's a messianic reference to the omer. And of course, if you recall, the omer was the amount of manna that was sufficient for each person. So there's real significance there when we attach that aleph tah to the omer. So they'd continue to count days while harvesting grain until all the bikurim, or all the people would return with their own bikurim, which is the first fruits offering that they would bring. So the priest brings the reshit first fruits, and the people bring their bikurim first fruits at Shavuot. So the priest starts the 50-day count with a simple offering of an omer of barley, and that count culminates with a massive bikurim offering of wheat brought from all throughout the land by the people. We're supposed to be thinking about the aleph tah the entire time, and the harvest attributed to him, the wheat harvest. Remember what John the Immerser said? He said his winnowing fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly clean out his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. So, can you see the prophetic significance in this? This period of counting the omer is highly, highly significant for the Messiah and the harvest that he's going to take place in, well, that he's going to actually bring about this harvest, and he's going to gather his wheat into his barn. And at the same time, there's going to be judgment as the chaff is going to be burned up. And we talk about that a lot, the combination of a deliverance and a redemption and deliverance at the same time that there's judgment. And we're expecting to see something along that line in the future, greater exodus. Well, speaking of the grain harvest, the wheat harvest, can you see the prophetic significance involving the Messiah and Joseph? That was, after all, why the story was couched within the context of grain and wheat. Again, these rehearsals are all going to be fulfilled when Yeshua harvests the earth. And you want to be harvested among his first fruits that we read about in Revelation 14 through 16. And that's why it's important that when the Master returns, he finds us watching, waiting, and ready, and on the right calendar. Now, apparently there were people who observed the Feast of Unleavened Bread last month. They were in the wrong season and even the wrong year. They were not in the month of the Abib, when things are turning green and new life is springing forth. They were celebrating in winter. Can you see the rebellion associated with their actions? They're getting ahead of the priest. They want to do it their own way, and like Korah and those who followed him in the wilderness. Well, some calendars use the ancient Babylonian method of beginning the new year at the first new moon after the spring equinox, but that fails the test of Exodus 22:9, and it doesn't follow the rule of the equinox to use the closest new moon. Sometimes the new moon after the spring equinox is the closest, but oftentimes it's not. If this method was followed in ancient Israel, it would result in a devastating delay of the harvest. Remember that people could not start harvesting until the priest made the first offering. In Deuteronomy 16:9 we read, "You shall count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain." Well, this commandment is referring to the Reshit offering made by the priest that initiates the count to Shavuot. So the point was to be as early as possible, but not too early, because the 3 pilgrimage feasts must all occur in the same year. We read that in Deuteronomy 16:16. It says, 3 times a year all your males shall appear before Yahweh your Elohim in the place which he chooses, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, also known as Shavuot, and at the Feast of Sukkot. And they shall not appear before Yahweh empty-handed. Once again, that's why the equinox is so important as a marker for the feasts. All 3 feasts must occur in the same year, and that's why the starting point is critical. And it's all in the hands of our Creator and High Priest, not some subjective opinion about barley crops from different self-appointed inspection teams in the land of Israel. This is an important lesson for us all. We need to follow the lead of our high priest and wait upon him. We must not be presumptuous and not, chase around different traditions that we think are right. We can't start too early or arrive too late. And we must be wise. Well, last week I provided my testimony concerning how I came out of the barley cult through meeting with 2 witnesses in Jerusalem at Shavuot. After that time, I became a witness and continued to travel to the land and test whether the crop synchronized with the calendar based solely on the sun and the moon. I can testify as an eyewitness that using the rule of the equinox to intercalate has always synchronized the appointed times with the harvest. There's always sufficiently ripened barley by day 16 of month 1. If there was a priest to make a Reshit Omer offering, he could do it. And that's the only significance of the barley. It's needed for the offering, but it does not determine the calendar. And you don't need ripe barley before the new moon to declare a month 1. Yahweh declares it through the 2 great lights that he placed in the sky as signs for years. He then provides sufficient barley when needed for the Reshit offering. And it's not that much either. The focus on determining the new year for Israel was not on barley, it was on the sun and the moon. Historians such as Josephus confirm that the feast must occur after the spring equinox, and we read that in Antiquities. And scholars such as Julian Morgenstern confirmed that the spring equinox was the primary factor in determining the time of celebration of the Mazot festival, which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, in this early period. And that was in an article on the 3 calendars of ancient Israel. Last week I quoted the scholarly article written by Philip Durstein and Magdal LaRue, titled The Ancient Israelite Calendar, and it bears repeating here. In that paper, the authors concluded that the observational aspects of the Israelite calendar, the sighting of the evening crescent, the setting of the sun for the start of the day, and the rule of the equinox for determining intercalation, all remained normative for most Jews until the Middle Ages. It was during the Middle Ages that the man-made rabbinic calendar that we see today began to dominate because it was easier and because a lot of the people were no longer in the land. Up until that time, people would intercalate based upon the observations of the visible lights. Intercalation involves determining whether a 13th month will be observed. Because of the difference between the lunar cycle and the solar cycle, you'll always have to insert a 13th month at various intervals in lunisolar reckoning. And it's interesting how many people are so indoctrinated into a 12-month mentality that they cannot accept the notion of a 13-month year. They fail to understand the prophetic significance of a 13th month. Recall that the tribe of Joseph was divided and elevated into two different tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. They were adopted and elevated into the positions of firstborn and secondborn. We can read about that in Genesis. It says, "Now it came to pass after these things that Joseph was told, 'Indeed, your father is sick.' And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob was told, 'Look, your son Joseph is coming to you.' And Israel strengthened himself and sat up on the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, 'El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me.'" And Luz was the former name of Bethel. "And said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a multitude of people, and give this land to your seed after you as an everlasting possession. And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Your offspring, whom you beget after them, shall be yours. They will be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance.'" So Ephraim took over the positions of Reuben and Simeon. And don't forget, these boys had an Egyptian mother. Nevertheless, they inherited the promise that passed down from Abraham through Isaac to Jacob. Therefore, we should be looking for a return of Ephraim and Manasseh, i.e. Joseph, to claim their inheritance, not the Jewish people. Now, according to my math, the addition of 2 new sons in place of 1 results in 13 sons that would all become tribes. Jacob began as 11 tribes in Babylon, and then in Israel, Israel was 12 in the covenant land after Benjamin was born, and he later became 13 through the adoption in Egypt. This all has great prophetic significance for Israel. Sadly, there are many who advocate solar calendars that actually suppress this amazing reality built into time. We should be looking for a year with 13 months for the redemption of Israel, all 13 tribes. As I've said before, there were rogue and rebellious groups that followed solar calendars in the wilderness, but Yahuwah never condoned that. While the rebels rejected Jerusalem and the temple, Yeshua still went there. He cleansed the temple and he taught. Even after his death and resurrection, the followers of Yeshua continued to go to the temple. And of course, Yeshua sent the Spirit into the people gathered in Jerusalem on Shavuot after the resurrection and ascension. James oversaw the people of the way from Jerusalem. He even told Saul to pay for certain individuals to complete their vows in the temple, as proof that he was not teaching against the Torah. The followers of Yeshua did not leave Jerusalem until they saw the abomination of desolation that he'd warned about in the Olivet Discourse. And only at that time did they flee to the mountains and then settle in the safety of Pella across the Jordan. We know that the rebellious Pharisees created a new calendar that became known as the Jewish calendar centuries after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. It was not the calendar of Yahuwah and Yisrael. The Jewish calendar and the solar calendars found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls are all born out of rebellion. By following the Torah and using the sun and the moon, next week will mark either the beginning of month 1 or the beginning of a month 13. We start at the equinox to determine the new year, and most people are not accustomed to gauging the spring equinox, but I can assure you that ancient people could keep track of it. Of course, many people assume that since the pagans used the equinox, then the equinox must be pagan. Of course, that's not the case. They simply understood that it was an important part of reckoning time. And of course, this was built into creation from the beginning. So people have always known about the turns, the Tekufot, the winter solstice, the summer solstice, the fall equinox, and then the spring equinox. Well, once you know when it is, you can mark the relative position of the sun and track its movement as it progresses back and forth between the winter solstice and the summer solstice. They are actually the outer limits of its movement. It's simple geometry, and even those who aren't good at math have no excuse now, because I will tell you that the approaching spring equinox will land on March 20th, 2024, which is 11 days from now. Now, if you've been watching the moon, you would expect to see the next crescent around 3 days from now, since last night was likely the last time we could observe the waning crescent at about 1% illumination. We expect to see the first waxing crescent on Monday, March 11th, 2024, after sunset at around 2% illumination, because it goes dark for a bit of time. Interestingly, the entire Muslim world will be looking for that crescent moon because it will mark the beginning of Ramadan. They often use telescopes to sight the moon, so they may mark the beginning of the month a day earlier. They may see it through telescopes when we can't see it through the naked eye. But of course, we use the naked eye to, people should be observing these things. That's the way Yah set it up. Well, while they look to the moon for months, they have a drifting calendar that does not calibrate with the sun like the Torah provides. Theirs is a strictly lunar calendar that only uses the moon. Well, since a lunar month can only be 29 or 30 days, we would expect the following new moon to be around 31 days from now. So, using simple math, the new moon next week will be 9 days from the spring equinox, while the following new moon will be 20 days from the equinox. It's not even a close call. The closest new moon to the spring equinox will be the new moon next week. Therefore, that new moon will mark the beginning of the new year and month 1, the month of the Abib. So I hope you can see, really how basic this is. Once you get an understanding of how to determine an equinox, then it's just a matter of using our observations of the moon to determine which one is going to be closer. And of course, we have incredible instrumentation nowadays that can give us precision that the ancients never had. But you didn't have to have that precision in order to determine the beginning of the year. So if we start counting days from that point of the new moon next week, it places the equinox on day 9 of month 1, which means that the new season starts at that point. And we know that the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins on day 15 of month 1. That places the feast after the spring equinox. It's out of winter and into the season of spring as early as possible. And that's how we determine the years according to the Torah. Very simple. And interestingly, as a side note, because we have all this modern instrumentation, it will result in the upcoming year having 13 months as well. So we know we're going into a new year next week, and that new year is going to have 13 months. Well, with all the upcoming signs, we're clearly being told to wake up, shouting from the heavens, and it seems like this is going to be an interesting and exciting year, and I'll get into the signs more as we progress into the new year. For now, let me be one of the first to wish you a happy new year, as we will celebrate a new day, a new month, and a new year after sunset on Tuesday, March 11th.
Actually, Monday.
2024. And while you're looking up, sighting the renewed moon with your shofar in hand, don't forget to watch for the Messiah while you guard the month of the Abib. Barakot and Shana Tova. My name is Todd Bennett from ShemaiIsrael.net. And just as a final note, I posted the 2024 appointed time schedule on the website that you can download as a PDF. And as with every year prior to Passover, there's much confusion due to the rebels out there confusing the sheep. And I'm pleased to report that there are some really good videos that a good brother of mine named Daryl Carr did. And I have these listed here that you can go to on YouTube. And also, as always, the Torah calendar site is loaded with information specifically for this time. And I would recommend the section titled Determining the Hebrew Year. So that's it for now. Again, Happy New Year. And I will be back next week with another message for you regarding Passover. Shalom.